So, thanks for having me on Digital Learning Day. This session's on engineering successful student collaboration. My name is Matt Spears. My job title is a technology integrator, but what I really like to do is learn. So, some of the stuff I've learned over time through experience, some of it I've learned through research. But here we go. So, what we're going to talk about today is a lot of the how. How do you engineer the collaboration into activities and really doing it with purpose? And that purpose being improving student learning. It's not good enough to just throw students in a room, call them collaborative, or throw a tool at them that has collaboration at its core. You have to structure that in a particular way. So, we're going to talk about some of the things that you as teachers or you as an educator can do to try and engineer that success in collaboration. So the agenda for today is to talk about collaboration and some of the fundamentals and apply them to some student group work. We're going to talk about actions that teachers can take and actions that students can take. And then we're going to talk about a couple examples that we can use inside Chesterfield to help with students doing collaborative work. Point at some of the tools we've got. So back in high school, when group work started to become a norm, this was my reaction. And it didn't stop when I got to college. Group work stunk because nobody knew how to work in a group, me being one of them. I quickly understood that my ability to accomplish a task all by myself and so the skill set that I had in accomplishing that task did not translate necessarily to group work. The way that a group of people accomplish a task is fundamentally different than the way an individual would accomplish that group activity or that collaborative work. So we have to acknowledge that as educators, as we're trying to engineer a successful activity. We got to step back and get kids to think about that at its core. So there's three big things that we're going to talk about next as you start to prepare your students to collaborate better and to collaborate with greater purpose, greater fidelity, and greater efficiency. And here they are. We're gonna talk about creating an interdependence amongst the group, the collaborators. We're gonna talk about the skills that are needed to do that. And then on the very end, there's got to be an accountability measure. And thank goodness you're the educator in the room that's going to be doing that. Great teams do all of that well and know that they're going to be targeting those things. So the first, when you've got your project, you know you're getting ready to try and tackle something, you throw those kids in groups, you throw those learners in groups, get them to create shared goals. Everybody needs a stake in what they're trying to accomplish. That puts ownership on the individuals contributing with meaning to the team's greater outcome. This is a critical step in the collaboration process. Next, you need to make sure that the people in that group know what they're supposed to be doing and they get to own a little bit of that responsibility. Assigning those roles and taking ownership in how the team performs, very important. Last thing, as you, the educator and the guider of this group work, you want to focus their attention on using only the best resources. Good enough isn't going to cut it. What you want is the best resources. This helps your students put the lens of, I need to be critical with how much research, what type of research, is it the right type of research? Is it credible? Or what type of image, like if I'm doing a presentation, is this good enough or is this really an image that helps convey my thought? So all those steps really help to create an interdependence between the members on that group and help them collaborate with greater fidelity. Next thing we're going to talk about is teamwork and the skills that make a team work well. First, let them spend time thinking about teams. This doesn't have to, they don't have to dive in and start doing the work of accomplishing whatever it is that you've told them they need to accomplish. Let them think about what makes a good team and then start to translate those things, those ideas, those elements of a strong team into action steps. Well, because they're a good team in this particular way, What do you think got them to that particular point? What were their action steps? Next, do exactly the opposite. What are the pitfalls of unsuccessful teams? Where do teams break down? Where do they fail? What are failed efforts that had a collaborative nature, that tried to be transparent? Why did they fail? What was the reasoning? We're starting to move toward actually starting to accomplish the task at hand. Get them to identify what the work is going to be. So get them to start mapping out what this project is going to require. Identify the things that are going to require a lot of intensity and difficult to accomplish. And that's where you can start to force those students into breaking those difficult or intense tasks into smaller steps. This helps them divide some of those tasks and stair step and scaffold upon each other's getting that work done together. This helps build that team, build that collaborative nature. Next, during the process, in process, as they're completing this project, you want to force them to self-reflect upon the things that they identified as a strong team. So if they said a strong team is one that communicates well, during that project, they should reflect on how they're communicating well. And if they are identify a weakness, they should do the exact same. And upon the end of the project, they should take those same questions and evaluate their peers. So if we identified as a team that communication was important, I need to be able to evaluate the folks that I worked on that team with within the on the lens of communication. I need to be able to say this was a strong communicator, this was a weak communicator, or somewhere in between. And that's where your step of accountability comes in. As you, the educator leading this group work, you have the ability to kind of help somebody that gets weak marks connect the dots between their self-evaluation and the team's evaluation of them. It helps them become a better individual to become a better teammate. So that's a lot of infrastructure for setting up quality collaboration in your classroom. That's a good amount of time to spend off content, but I think it's going to make the work of each team, of each group, much, much better. I think you're going to have happier kids with better products and better learning at the end. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to pop out of the slide deck and start talking about some examples. We're going to make this tangible. So example one, we're going to talk about how technology can help facilitate a writing example between either one student and the next, or one student, the next student who's peer reviewing, and then possibly the teacher. We're going to take a look at some of the tools available to student. So here's the first example. This is a Google Doc that is a writing sample with lots of images, links, citations, all over it. So some of the tools that help make learning better, make somebody critically think about what they've put on into their writing, can exist in what you're seeing on the right side of the page. You've got things that are called suggestions over here. So in the top right of any Google Doc, you've got the ability to switch as an editor between editing full on and changing the actual copy of the text, or moving into suggestion mode, where this is a suggestion that I, an editor, would make to the author of this document, and the author would have the ability to accept that suggestion or reject it. So this is a tool that helps the collaboration process and the peer editing process. Another thing that you're seeing here is a couple of help things along the way. So let's say somebody's peer editing my work, and they want to figure out how to use a particular tool or insert hyperlinks to make my document, to make my writing sample even better. Some of these comments are baked right in to that Google Doc. So I have the ability as a editor to put comments to the author right there, and they can see them. Over time, evidence of that collaboration is accounted for up in the comments section. So you have the ability as an author, as a teacher, as a peer editor to take a look at what those comments were over time. And as those are taken care of, you can actually resolve them or accept suggestions. Now down here at the bottom, I want to make a particular comment on something. The formatting here doesn't make sense, so I can actually highlight a bunch of text and say, examine the formatting. Examine the format. Does not look right. So I can give that to whoever is the author of this particular assignment, and they have that to take a look at and resolve. As a teacher, you might want to think about providing the editor the same rubric that you would use to evaluate. Again, this promotes the accountability element at the end, where you could take a look at a rubric and say, hey, hey, you were the editor here and you put 5s down for all of this stuff. When I look through this, this is terrible writing, and your editing should have made this better. You were a bad collaborator. That's a skill you need to develop. Let's try and normalize and get on the same page with how you should use this rubric that I'm evaluating all these students on. So good way to kind of tie in that rubric into that writing sample of a student. I want to talk about the next example that you might think about a little bit more collaborative of a project that might exist across time, maybe across walls, across scheduling. This is an example of a project that was done from one student on an even day to another student on an odd day over the course of weeks early in the school year. So the idea was to study not just the process of a butterfly making his way into the world, but also to start students down the path of the different types of observation and what makes good observation. So what you're looking at here is a combination, is a single slide deck that alternates colors back and forth, where one student is an even day student taking pictures of the caterpillar and is in charge of writing down what they see on those days. And the other student is an odd day student looking at the exact same caterpillar, taking pictures of that caterpillar that day. So this continued over the course of a handful of weeks until the caterpillar made his own little cocoon, and then they had a nice release party where they released all the butterflies into their world. But it was a really neat collaborative project of bouncing back and forth between days. One of the other things that the students had to do was document and input how big the caterpillars were getting over the course of time, and they made graphs to indicate how the caterpillars were growing. So another kind of responsibility check between the two students over time. So last collaborative idea I want to talk about is how students can do collaborative based video editing using a tool like WeVideo. So WeVideo has a handful of different options for collaboration. The first one we're going to talk about has, or really the only one we're going to talk about is students coming to one project. So we're not going to talk about two of the other elements that WeVideo provides, but we're going to talk about how a group of students can edit one particular project to accomplish a message. So things that are paramount in making this a successful endeavor for students is defining those tasks, collecting materials, creating materials. Students are going to be responsible for editing, re-editing, creating storyboards, and writing scripts. So these are a bunch of different roles that students can fulfill, and they can try to pick up and put down as needed. Now, some of these are going to be heavy at the beginning, which leaves them open for opportunities at the end to be good reviewers and helpers when their workload has shifted. So that's an important thing to consider as a teacher as you're pointing at a collaborative project. The teacher's role is going to be important though, because you have to make sure that the students are doing what they need to be doing during class, and that's also excellent opportunity for you to pull, let's call it, all of the students that are editing out and make sure their skill set is solid before the editing process moves forward. So good opportunity, good thing for a teacher to start to consider to build skill sets inside kids and target kids, be successful as collaborators. Last thing that teacher's going to be kind of important and integral in is really making sure those self-reflections are happening and that they correlate to the overall peer reflections at the end. So that accountability element is really touchy and important for a teacher to take an active role in. So this is what WeVideo looks like when you open it up. To start off on a collaborative project, you'd click New, you'd start Project here, and then you're going to select the collaborative project in the middle. So I'm going to give it a title, Collaboration Tools, and I'm going to click the middle one and say Next. And then I'm going to get this link and give it to my students in need. So I'm going to grab this particular link right here. I'm going to copy it. And now I'm ready to give that link to those students in, let's call it group 1, and then I'd create a new project for group 2, and they would be able to take advantage of editing within this project for that specific group, and they could share out at the end. So to review, let's talk, don't forget students might not have a great experience with group work. And you need to make sure they understand that just because they're excellent students in their own right, it doesn't make them great collaborators out of the gate. Be sure to hone in on these 3 elements and some of the subsets of the skills inside of those content areas to make sure that collaboration is happening at a high level and you're preparing your students to continue to do group work over time. So thanks so much for dialing in. Matt Spears signing off.